Larimer well, and Cory, thank you very much for being a man of your word and keeping that. I have a very, very brief comment, and actually a not so serious question, a serious question. The not so serious question is, I think the reason, and I am from Fort Collins, okay, that we are now in Congressional District 2 is because you ended up with the same color office as Jared Paul. So if you briefly tell that story. But my question, it was a very nice lead-in, what you were saying in terms of water storage issue. I was recently at a work-study session of the Fort Collins City Council, and a city councilman who shall remain anonymous, but his initials are KO, called Glade Reservoir the reservoir from hell. And he and some of the other progressives were really launching into, oh, we can't do this, the Rebels Meadow Jumping Mouse will drown. My question is, I love that award-winning clip where you were taking on the EPA guy. Is there any hope without getting Republican majorities in both houses of Congress and in the White House to deregulate or completely kill the EPA so that we can actually start to store water like we have been able to do in the past with what our forefathers left us as a legacy?
Well, to answer your first question, yes, Jared Polis and I think we both have this sunshine yellow, lemon pie yellow office. And if you come into my office, which I hope you will, in 213 Canada, you'll get plenty of vitamin D. Wear your sunglasses in there because it is a bright, bright color. But on the issue of water itself, look, we really do face significant challenges. And that's why I firmly believe, whether it's the Army Corps of Engineers that's involved in certain water projects in Colorado, whether it is the Bureau of Reclamation, which is a Western agency dealing primarily with water issues, or whether it is the EPA, that we should be learning from the states and following the lead of the states and those water agencies and entities that are here who know what's best for the people of Colorado, not trying to drive or dictate a Washington, D.C. decision onto the people of Colorado, but working with them so that a Colorado idea can move forward and the federal government in support of that Colorado idea. So, I mean, that's where you look at what we can do. I mean, the regulations that have been manipulated or used to stall, to hurt water projects, the numbers speak for themselves. 69% of average snowpack. Most of our water that Colorado has, 2/3 of the state's economic value, agriculture, 2/3 of the value of the state's agricultural production occurs in the South Platte Basin, in the northern Colorado and northeastern part of the state. 2/3 of the overall value of agriculture in Colorado comes out of that basin. It's 80% of normal. Last year, 1 million acre-feet of water left the state that we could have put to a beneficial use and stored right here. And so I encourage you, anybody who's interested in this, to take a look at the SWASI analysis, the statewide water initiative. You call our office, we can send a copy of it to you. It was put together by the Department of Natural Resources. They've since come out with a second study, but it really is compelling what it shows could happen to the state of Colorado. The South Platte River is in Colorado anyway, the hardest working river in the state. And how many people rely on it? And what is it? I think 1.5 million people rely on the South Platte River. And so to keep our agriculture vibrant, to keep our economies vibrant, it really is a strong issue. So, Mel, we are working with the EPA, trying to make sure that their bureaucrats don't get in the way of common sense Colorado ideas, and we'll continue to do that. And if you have identified any specific issue, please let us know, because we will certainly work on that. Bill.
As you know, Cory, I work a lot with veterans issues and honor flight, and thank you for your support of the program. In talking with a lot of my friends that you meet in those programs, World War II and the Korean, they're nervous about veteran benefits in the context of the current financial situation. Any comment on how the thinking is in Congress in that?
Yeah, to me, it is absolutely, over the past year, you saw different continuing resolutions come up, different discussions come up over funding levels and whether or not, if there was if government was to run out of funds, whether or not certain benefits would be paid. It is absolutely unconscionable to think that our men and women in uniform and our veterans would be used as a political tool for an objective. Absolutely unconscionable. I have introduced legislation, co-sponsored legislation, that would make sure that you can't do that anymore, trying to threaten pay of our men and women in uniform, threaten benefits. They should not be able to do that, no way, no how. So thank you for your service. Thanks for the veterans in this room for your service to the country. When it comes to overall issues of funding, we've got to make sure that we take a hard look at spending in this country. 44 cents of every dollar is being used with borrowed money. And so if you look at where the areas of spending are, you can see it right here. You can see the mandatory side of spending, the discretionary side of spending. Roughly half, a little over half, 2010 levels of discretionary spending was defense spending. And so should we take a look at defense spending as an area that we should reduce spending? I think there are areas within defense spending that we can reduce, and we should reduce. That's why I supported eliminating the second engine on the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35. That's why I think we can continue to look for efficiencies to make. But when it comes to the security of this country, when it comes to the ability of our men and women in uniform to protect themselves, we shouldn't cut that money. And we certainly have to do everything we can to live up and fulfill our promises that we have made to veterans in this country. Yes, sir.
I'm very curious because one of the first things I heard was eliminate the EPA. I think the EPA does a good job. However, once you get through the first initial stages, why then is the delays going on? This was a good example of it. You rehash the same crap over and over and over. I wonder, Cory, how much was given to consideration by the EPA to store water downstream in Boulder Reservoir for Mexico because they could not store their water. I asked at last year's Colorado Water Congress, how do you know what was done down there? Well, I don't know. That was made from the upper powers. If we're going to be restricted to that same restrictions here for getting projects through, then downstream should do the same thing. I don't care whether it's Mexico or whoever it is downstream. I believe that we were hoodwinked into believing that it was just because we had room down there. I asked the question also, if Boulder Reservoir would fill up, would Mexico's water be the first to spill? Windy Gap water was the first to spill out of Granby Reservoir because we didn't have room to store it. Now, is that same thing going to happen downstream?
Yeah, and I'm unfamiliar with water that may be stored in Boulder Reservoir. I'm assuming what you're talking about is water to comply with any international treaties that the United States may have with Mexico in terms of delivering water through treaties we have. Because where the Colorado River enters into Mexico, we are under an obligation to provide water and what it is. So I'm unfamiliar though with anything that may have used water in Boulder Reservoir as compensatory storage for that treaty. I'm unaware of that. I can certainly look into that, and maybe some folks here with Northern Colorado have an answer. And the Colorado River, I mean, you look at how many states rely on the Colorado River for their water, the lower basin states, the upper basin states. It's significant, and if we have a year where it's not only a drought in Colorado, but a year in the upper and lower basin states, there's going to be some significant challenges that occur. So I don't know the answer to that, but we can try to find the answer for that, whether there's compensatory storage or not in Boulder Reservoir. Thank you. And I agree with you, by the way, on the regulatory side of things. We need good common sense environmental regulations. Where they go too far, that's where we have to make sure that we are doing our job in oversight. Yes?
I think you're on the Energy Committee.
Yes.
If I remember right, and even though my husband was an exploration geophysicist once upon a time, and before that my mother worked for an energy company also, I don't know what to think about fracking because of our water needs and agriculture. How do we combine all the interests?
Yeah, no, and thank you for that. I think, I believe, as Governor Hickenlooper believes, as Senator Udall has said, that the decisions on fracking ought to be made at the local level. I don't think we should regulate them at the federal level. I think that ought to be a local decision. The state of Colorado just came out with a series of regulations when it comes to hydraulic fracturing and fracking, but I believe that ought to be deferred to the state, just as Governor Hickenlooper does.
First of all, thank you for your service, Congressman Gardner, on my behalf and my family's behalf. What is the enthusiasm and support in the Congress to get that pipeline built? I know that it is likely not to happen unless Mr. Obama needs an election issue to say, here I am pro, but what's the chance of it actually happening in 2013?
And I'm assuming you're talking about the Keystone XL pipeline?
Yes.
Yeah. The Keystone, everybody familiar with the pipeline? This is a pipeline that would come from Canada, deliver oil sands through a pipeline that would go through the United States, eastern Nebraska, and create jobs. You're right. And this is the information that we have received. I do serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and the testimony that we have received through that committee says that that pipeline, construction of it would create around 20,000 jobs directly. Indirectly would create around 100,000 jobs. And we also had testimony earlier last year in committee that identified the Alberta oil sand development and its specific impact on Colorado. And the information that we received at the Energy Committee said that the overall development of the Alberta oil sands, which is the pipeline is a component of, would create as many as 6,000 jobs in Colorado between 2011 and 2015. And so we have a great opportunity to create jobs and to utilize North American energy, again, getting ourselves off of reliance on overseas energy, but doing everything we can to promote North American energy. The President is under requirement to make a decision by the end of February. If you want to know where he is in that decision, you can go to energycommerce.house.gov, and there's a countdown clock that shows how long it's taken the President to make the decision. I think right now it's 22 or 23 days since he said he would make a decision. And so that decision needs to be made soon. I think it makes sense. Now, if the United States says no, are they still going to develop it?
Yeah, we're trying.
That's exactly right. Both Canada has said that they will still go forward, they'll just find another partner. China has said they're more than willing to be that partner. There's another question over. Yes?
Medicare and Social Security are strong programs that you've devoted yourself to support, and I'd like to know how the failure of the Congress to come to an agreement on deficit-cutting measures is going to affect those programs.
Yeah, and we have protected, and I believe we must protect Social Security and Medicare to preserve and protect them for future generations. And I'm committed to making sure that we make them even stronger and preserve that strong safety net. So if you look at the debt agreement, it does identify certain areas where spending had to be reduced over the next 10 years. The one area where spending was supposed to be reduced may impact certain providers of certain healthcare providers. And I think that we need to take a look at making sure that any decision to reduce the deficit continues to protect and strengthen Medicare and Social Security. So I don't believe those cuts will hurt any part of Medicare or Social Security, but in fact we've got an obligation to make sure that we are protecting and strengthening those two programs. So thank you.
I'd like to remind you, you're on an energy committee.
Yes.
And in 1912, John D. Rockefeller was told that he was violating antitrust laws. You have to divide up your company. Mr. Rockefeller obeyed the law, broke up the company in different parts. Now we're in 2012, and where is Mr. Rockefeller's company? Right where it was in 1912. Most profitable, and that's due to integrity, intelligence, and research. The American public should know the difference between Enron and Exxon, when one is one of the greatest in the country for over 100 years, and the other one, the people are in prison and have paid heavy fines. So the public should know how bad Enron was and how good ExxonMobil is.
Well, thank you.
Would you help them?
Well, I think, yeah. Well, the antitrust laws don't go through Energy and Commerce Committee. They go through Judiciary Committee. But yeah, Energy and Commerce Committee, by the way, I should spend a little time talking about that. But I will make sure that I relay your concern on to the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And for those of you who don't know, the Energy and Commerce Committee jurisdiction, it does involve energy, so that's a part of it, energy policy. But at the commerce side, it also gets into things like Medicaid, FDA, oversight of the FDA, oversight of the EPA, has oversight over telecommunications, broadband issues. So it's a committee with a very broad jurisdiction. Yes?
Thanks for being here, Congressman. I'm Ryan Cabrera. I'm the superintendent of schools here at the Thompson School District here as well. I'm really interested in both your perspective and maybe progress report on the Elementary Secondary Schools Act. It has been stalled in Congress and House, I believe, for the last 18 months. It has great influence on all the schools in the state nationally, and so I guess I'm trying to see where we can get off the dime.
Yeah, and the question was, everybody heard the question, I guess. But you know what, I believe it's my obligation as a member of Congress to make sure that you are allowed to lead your school district, that your teachers are allowed to teach their classes, your school board is allowed to govern the district, and it shouldn't be done by Congress. The last thing that I want to have happen is Congress leading your local school district. So I believe in local control and making sure that Congress gets out of your way. That being said, the ESEA reform was talked about to a significant degree early last year. It seems like they have stalled, and to me that's unacceptable. I want to take a look at those and make sure that we're doing everything we can to get government out of your school district, the federal government out of your school district, so the state of Colorado and you can do your job. And that's where we are. I know the state of Colorado has applied for a waiver, and we're anxiously awaiting word from the Department of Education in terms of where they stand with making that decision. One second, yes.
You said that the Ryan plan budget would protect and save Medicare, and that if you were over the age of 55, it would not affect you. What about the people under 55 making the minimum wage? How are they going to live on the meager retirement they have been unable to save for? We will have thousands of people that could never save a penny for retirement.
Well, I know there's my parents, for instance, my family. I have a number of family who are family members who are under the age of 55. And if we do nothing to address Medicare today, they won't be able to participate. The health care bill that passed 2 years ago cuts $500 billion from Medicare. It creates an independent payment advisory board, which is a group of people who are unaccountable to Congress, who can make decisions without congressional oversight, have a great deal of autonomous authority to deal and change the way we receive healthcare Medicare when we enter the program. And so how is somebody going to be receiving Medicare under the age of 55? They're going to receive Medicare. It doesn't eliminate Medicare. In fact, Ron Wyden, a Democrat senator from Oregon, has introduced the premium support plan, just like we passed in the House. And so I think the argument of he said, she said, Democrats trying to claim this is the end, are greatly mistaken, because even Senator Ron Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon, believes the premium support plan is the right way to go.
But the people will not have a retirement, an income, Medicare, Medicaid, that's medical. What are they going to live on?
Well, that's why we have to do everything we can, not only to protect the integrity of Social Security, but we've also got to improve our economy so people have strong jobs that they're able to make ends meet now and hopefully save for their retirement. But without a strong economy, without getting this country back on track economically, it's going to be very difficult for people. So we've got to preserve and protect Medicare, Social Security, and the best way to do that is to make sure that it doesn't get undermined by simply doing nothing. Because right now, doing nothing is the end of Medicare.
Are you against raising, having the top 1% pay extra so that it would kind of bring us all together?
Yeah, I don't think increasing, I mean, in your own statement there, taking the top 1% so that it will bring us all together, I think right there we're dividing people. And so I think what we need to do is focus on improving the economy. I don't think increasing taxes is the way to improve our economy. I believe reducing spending, making sure that we are doing everything we can to reduce our deficits, we can address our debt, that we can pass a balanced budget amendment to make sure that we are moving forward as a country, not straining future generations under unimaginable and unsustainable debt. So that's what we need to be doing. But I don't think increasing taxes without controlling spending is the way forward. Yes?
Yes. One of the issues that seems to me like it comes up is that there was a general understanding that one of the key areas that Congress and all the other units that were involved needed to address the financial and operational sustainability of the Medicare, Medicaid, healthcare, Social Security area. And so, in the great wisdom of the President and the Congress, what they did for the last 2 years is cut out the funding that will flow to support that. So they've actually reduced the resources that are available to continue that. They did in no way address the issues of how to reduce costs and control unnecessary expenditures or anything like that. And yet nobody ever mentioned the fact that they did the opposite of what needed to be done and made it a patriotic effort for doing it.
Well, I think if you go back to the time when the President's health care bill was passed, I think there are two primary promises that were made during the time of that debate. One promise was that if you liked your health insurance, that you'd get to keep it. You wouldn't have to change it. The second primary promise that was made is that this would help reduce the cost of care. Richard Foster, the chief actuary of Medicare, he's not a Democrat or a Republican appointee, he's an independent actuary, has testified before Congress that neither of those two promises are going to come true. That if you have insurance, you're not necessarily going to be able to keep it, as they promised. And we have seen that health costs have increased. We have got to address the increasing cost of health care.
But you haven't done that. Instead,
we are trying.
reduce the funds that go to it.
We're working on tort reform, working on other initiatives using technology and other ways to help reduce the cost of health care, and working on delivery systems.
Reduce the money that flows to support it.
The only people who've reduced it to support it in terms of Medicare is the President with a $500 billion cut in his health care bill to Medicare. He passed that 2 years ago, as he created the Independent Pay Advisory.
This elimination of the deduction of the percentage of salary to people.
Oh, are you talking about the payroll tax?
Going there.
Yeah. Are you talking about the payroll tax holiday?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you were asking.
That's what's missing.
The payroll tax holiday.
That was eliminated.
Yeah, the payroll tax, everybody understands where the payroll tax gets paid. That money comes out of your paycheck and it funds things like Social Security or Medicare. Now, when you reduce that amount of money, it means that you aren't sending that money into Social Security or Medicare. That's why I think it's important that when we talk about this, that we find appropriate offsets to make sure that we are reducing spending in other areas, to make sure that we are putting that money back into Social Security so that it doesn't hurt Social Security. So that's, or Medicare. So I think that if that's your question.
That's the opposite of what needed to be done.
He said there's no money been put in to replace that.
Well, no, there is. Now, the 2 month, if you look at the way they funded the 2 month.
That depends on how you define it.
The Senate.
Very poorly defined.
The Senate, the way they put together their 2 month pay for on the extension of the payroll tax holiday, if you have a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac mortgage, they increase the fees on your mortgage. That's how they're paying for it. So if you have a $200,000 mortgage, over the next 30 years, you'll be paying $5,000 to finance the next 2 months of payroll tax holiday. And if you want more information on that, we can get that. Senator, oh yes, sir, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yes. I was just wondering, I work at Festus Blades, electric turbines. And as you know, the federal production tax credit is due to expire in 2012. What are you doing in Congress to see that that gets extended for another 4 years? Because I mean, we're talking, it's going to affect a lot of jobs.
Yeah, and I have met with Vestas, I've met with others in the wind industry to address this issue. The expiring issue, I've talked to Chairman Dave Camp of the Ways and Means Committee about what his thoughts are on this and how we're going to move forward. I think there are ways forward. I certainly am a strong supporter of energy production, including wind energy. And so when I talked to Dave Camp, again, he's the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, I believe he was in Congress and participated in the original writing of the production tax credit. And one of the things that he has told me that he wanted to do was to take a look at overall comprehensive energy financing and taxation issues. So we may be seeing that. We may be seeing that conversation sooner rather than later. I know he wanted to do it earlier in 2012 than later in the year. But I talked to people at Vestas, and the leadership of your company has said it's important to address it early. And so there may be conversations about whether that can happen as part of the payroll tax holiday. So I have certainly been involved in those discussions and want to make sure that we find a solution that works for Vestas.
What do you think
Do I think what I think is going to happen with it? There's a couple different ideas. There's been a Steve King from Iowa, Kevin McCarthy from California. Others have introduced a bill that would provide an extension of the full credit. There's other ideas out there that would be take existing or permanent projects that haven't been built yet, but are on the books, and move them forward. So I think those discussions are still going forward. But again, I want to do what's right for Vestas and what's best for Colorado.
Cory, I had the pleasure of serving with you in the state legislature for 2 years, and certainly appreciated your contribution there and what you're doing in Congress now. I frankly came with a lot of questions, but you've answered most of them in a sound policy of supporting the growth of our economy rather than just trying to wring a few more dollars out for programs that we can't afford. My question that I still do have, though, is I'd like your observations on what we're seeing occurring in Europe at this time, and how that might be a warning to us in what road we should or shouldn't go down.
Yeah, and everybody see the news late last week when Standard & Poor's downgraded 9 European countries 1 level, and they downgraded a number of additional countries 2 notches down to AA+. This is a very real lesson that we should take to heart. That if we aren't serious about us addressing a long-term solution to this country's debt, the same thing worse is going to happen to us. So that's why we can't just debate about what we're going to do to bring this country's budget back into balance. We've actually got to put the policy in place, in line, and do it. I support the cut, cap, and balance effort that the House pursued last year, and I support it again. I think we ought to vote on a balanced budget amendment every chance we get to make sure that we're holding those people accountable who oppose a balanced budget. Again, I think this is frightening. $1.5 trillion deficit last year. 44 cents of every dollar we're borrowing. Nearly 44 cents of every dollar we're borrowing. It's unsustainable. And so if we're going to have long-term economic growth, if we're going to have long-term economic opportunity, we've got to get our spending under control. Because if you don't do that, you're increased interest rates, more difficult to borrow. If you're a local private business who wants to borrow to expand, it's going to be tougher for you to have access to capital. Taxes will have to increase because you need to finance the debt. You know, and you can see in this chart where it talks about the net interest. $202 billion. If interest rates normalize, increase the percentage, what does that do to it? $1 trillion over 10 years. Yes, Bob?
Cory, I'm going to swing a little bit here to a different topic. There's been a lot of discussion about money in politics going on right now. I know how much work you have to put in to raise enough money to run a campaign, and so does the opponent, right? I mean, it's huge. And I feel for you the amount of time you have to spend doing that because it's extremely difficult. But there will be a joint resolution introduced into the House to put an amendment in place, a constitutional amendment, that will define corporations as not humans. It's a bad way to say it, but that's basically what it's going to do. Would you support that kind of an amendment to the Constitution?
Well, I'd have to take a look at the amendment to see what it is. Haven't seen any language. I don't want to.
I'll give you a copy, but I got to overthink.
I don't take amending the Constitution lightly.
No, we definitely should not. But there seems to be no way that the Citizens United decision has opened up the floodgates, and I think we're going to see that in this campaign. And you, as a candidate, have to raise a certain amount of money, but you have no control over the money that comes in for either side, either for or against you. And I think that really sways our political process. We need to get the money removed from the political process to make your life easier.
Yeah, I would hope that, you know, again, it goes back to the issue of whether or not we amend the Constitution. I still think the constitutional amendment that we should have passed was the balanced budget amendment. And you know, we can't even pass a balanced budget amendment that says, hey, don't spend more money than you got. And the state of Colorado has a balanced budget amendment. I don't understand why the 49 states have a balanced budget amendment. I don't understand why the federal government can't. There was another question in the back over here, I thought. Yes, sir. Anyway, now hang on one second. Anybody who hasn't asked a question before want to jump in? Okay, let me go over here and then we'll come back. I'll come back to you, but just let me get to some others.
The word I'd like to emphasize is simplify. I tried reading the American Affordable Care Act and the Dodd-Frank bill, and I consider myself to be able to read English, but I can't read those things to the extent that I can understand them. It's really complex. Is there a way, and then adding on to that, in terms of simplification, once those bills are written, it seems like the rules and regulations then have to go to the administration. Can't the Senate and the House of Representatives write bills, number one, in a more simple fashion, and number two, write them in the sense that the administration doesn't have to come up with the rules and regulations? It might be even counter to the intent of those bills?
And you've touched on a couple points, and one of them I think would be answered by a single subject rule. The state of Colorado has a single subject rule, meaning that a bill can be about one thing and one thing only. And I think that if we were to have a single subject requirement, that a bill that passes to have a single subject issue, then I think...
Must be germane, any amendments.
And there are various germaneness rules and requirements, but we've got to get to a better idea that people can understand what it is they're reading. There's a picture that I'd love to show you. Find me after this. I know we've got a tight schedule, maybe I can email it to you. But there's a picture of a series of bills over the past 100 years dealing with financial regulations and financial services, starting with things like the Federal Reserve Act and Sarbanes-Oxley and other. And they printed it out. They printed out each copy of the bill. And some of these bills, I mean, they've had a major impact on our country over the past several decades. You know, they're this big, they're this big, they're this big, they're this big. And then it shows, it has a printout of the Dodd-Frank bill, and it's this big. And so what's going to happen to that bill? I'll tell you one example of what's going to happen with that bill. We, in August, kicked off the One More Job Initiative. And the One More Job Initiative was our way to solicit feedback from businesses throughout the 4th Congressional District of Colorado, saying, hey, what is it that's affecting you? What challenges do you see as a business that if we were to address them, if we were to change them, might allow you to grow again, to get back on your feet? And if you start growing again and are successful economically, then maybe you'll be able to hire more people. Because if just 10% of this state's 600,000 businesses hired one person, it'd create 60,000 jobs. But they're not going to hire unless we get the economy turned around. So the feedback we got from one company in Longmont, and we just visited there last week, was specifically addressing the Dodd-Frank bill. And he said, I used to be able to sell and finance a product. He's a broadband software provider. And one of the products he sells is now, it's impossible to finance because of the Dodd-Frank bill. He's had to lay people off. And so there's a regulation in a bill that's this big that has affected his bottom line and his ability to do business now.
We're not even finished with the rules on that.
And that's just the bill. That's not the regulations that came from it. Yeah. And so if you look at the feedback that we got from One More Job, it brings up the issue of economic certainty, regulatory certainty, knowing what's going to happen next. There's the Wall Street Journal has identified over $1 trillion over the past year or so that's sitting on the sidelines. Businesses have in their bank accounts. They're just afraid to invest because they don't know what's going to happen to them from a healthcare standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint. And so if we can address these issues of certainty or uncertainty, then we can do it to a great degree. Our economy a big favor.
Keep trying.
Yeah. Yes, back in the... Yeah.
If I could go to Social Security for just a second. Should the Congress be in a position to do so, how do they, if they are in a position to do so, how are the COLA adjustments, what methodologies are used to apply those each year? And secondarily, would the lack of a COLA adjustment just be used as a deferral, as in essence a backdoor funding for Social Security by virtue of not paying each year? I know this year is 3.62%. And folks, and I am a recipient, a recent recipient. If you ask me, 3.62%. Is it generally assumed that the methodologies that are employed in establishing those COLAs are accurate, reasonable, true?
Yeah. And Dan, can we get him a copy of the CRS report that explains the COLA?
By chance, I already gave him my business card.
Perfect. So,
I understand it, but I doubt the applicability to reality.
yeah, and that's the second part. So we'll get you that report that talks about, you know, how the COLA works, what's in the formula, how it works. But the bottom line is this: Congress has to stop raiding the Social Security trust fund. They're taking money out of it to fund things that aren't Social Security, and they got to stop. And your second point, you know, I hope that that's not the case. I hope people aren't trying to say that they won't issue that so they can finance it because they're borrowing against it.
That's the deferred.
Yeah, that's Congress has got to stop borrowing against it.
That is the deferred effect.
There's a bill that's been introduced that would stop the borrowing, and I hope that it can make its way through.
There's all kinds of, I work in banks for 20 years, you can read those financial statements 100 different ways. It all depends on the comparator.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, sir. You moved.
Actually, if I could add two things. It's not questions, but it's a little bit of a follow-up on a couple of points here. One, that picture is of a display at the Colorado Banking Association at 18th and Sherman. And they're the ones that show you how the regulations have grown.
I took a picture of my cell phone, so yeah, I've got it with me.
And secondly, 6-8 years ago, I was at a similar meeting like this with then Representative Musgrave, and she had the Undersecretary of Commerce there. The question I posed was the same: how have they changed those COLA rules and why? Because they did back in the 90s, and that Undersecretary said, yes, that's my area of authority, and in fact we did adjust them to try to reflect the realities of different spending patterns and buying patterns, but she admitted that it did degrade the inflation rate by, she said, less than 1%. I've heard discussions one way or the other, but you compound that over the years, and in fact we do have a ticking time bomb when it comes to the way the COLAs are constructed.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm going to this gentleman's question about, everybody can hear me, about some publicity, and I could be wrong about this, but didn't you all put a rider on the extension of the payroll tax cut, or maybe it was the debt ceiling, where the president had to make a decision about that XL pipeline? And those are two different things, so what does that have to do with simplifying it? And can you explain how the XL pipeline was pertinent to extending tax cut for the middle class and unemployment benefits?
Yeah, well, first of all, I supported a 12-month extension of the payroll tax holiday. And I really think 12 months was better than 2 months. I'm glad they got 2 months, and I hope there's 10 more months. But the challenge now is how to make it 10 months and to pay for it. The position that I stood for and voted for on the House floor would have provided $1,000 worth of payroll tax holiday versus a 2-month, $166 worth of tax holiday.